Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining for the first time, I appreciate your time as always. Smash the like button if you feel the country of South Africa has demonstrated leadership with regards to the Russian-Ukrainian war. To an extent, South Africa has put itself out there as a senior mediator, as a country that understands global issues and a country that can step into the ring if those big powers are shy with regards to other strategic issues that are happening around the world. The country of South Africa again has demonstrated that it is a country to be reckoned with. However, irrespective of your particular perspective of the country of South Africa is a major economy in the continent of Africa, a big player in the global south, and a country that has been pushed back and forth with regards to its strategic global relationship with the country of Russia, China, by the United States of America. Why am I saying this? One of the major superpowers in the world's leader who thought the Ukrainian-Russian issue was so basic and can be solved in 24 hours has now found out that this problem is not as simple as the United States of America thought.
It would have never happened in a million years, and even the Democrats admit that. But if this thing isn't solved by the time we have the election, which is possible, it won't be. And there's also possible we'll be in World War III with these idiots that are doing what they're doing. You could end up in a nuclear world war, which will make World War I and World War II look like patty cakes, okay? This unbelievable, because we have people that don't know what they're doing. But if it's not solved, I will have it solved in 24 hours with Zelensky and with Putin.
The visit by the leader of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, demonstrates that South Africa is paying attention and can take up heavy loads with regards to its strategic engagement. It is important that when we all were quiet, that the Russian-Ukrainian war was brewing, which is currently going on at the moment, the world was observing. When the leader of the country of South Africa headed an African delegation to Russia and to the country of Ukraine, they were laughed at, they were called beggars, they were called irresponsible, they were called an African mission. They were not perceived as a global African perspective trying to resolve problems that were happening in the European continent. Why am I saying this? It is important to note that the leader of the country of South Africa, as the leader that led the delegation from the continent of Africa, arrived in Ukraine, spoke with the Ukrainian leader and said, this is gonna end on the table. There's no way out. It's only peace that will be leading this particular war. That the Russians will be on the table and the Ukrainians will be on the table to solve this. However, what did we hear? The global media said this is a begging mission. The global media said this particular mission is of no significance.
Speak to our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Hello to you.
Hey,
Doug. There are some critics over this delegation. Some say it's the wrong group, and some say it's at the worst time. Why is that?
Well, you're right. The critics have been unsparing, and the critics mainly, obviously, Ukraine, but also in the U.S., Europe, members of NATO. What have they been saying? The criticism ranges from this is a laughingstock mediation mission, mediation in quotes, to they have absolutely no leverage compared to the real global powers such as China, which could have some bearing on this conflict if it really had the will or the political will, to they are not neutral. This is where the criticism is. I'll start with the we are not neutral plank. You have 6 nations taking part in this mission. And what's interesting is while more than a dozen African nations failed to condemn the Russian invasion early in the days last year, UN resolution, 4 of the nations on this mission abstained from that resolution condemning Russia's invasion. So you have one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest one, South Africa. You have Senegal. You have the Republic of Congo, and you have Uganda. Those 4 nations, that is 4 out of the 6 on this team, refused to vote, abstain from condemning. You do have 2 who are represented in this delegation, Egypt and Zambia, and they did vote to condemn Russia's invasion. So you have this neutrality problem here, a delegation whose members are not seen as neutral and at worst seen as beholden to Moscow for various things from, as you mentioned, dependence on grain and fertilizer and the goodwill of Vladimir Putin to continue exporting that grain and fertilizer.
As South Africa has said, a non-alliance stand is not negotiable. It will continue to build its relationship with the country of Russia and China, irrespective of what the United States of America thinks.
We are now also witnessing Africa being dragged into conflicts far beyond our own borders. Some countries, including our own, are being threatened with penalties for pursuing an independent foreign policy and for adopting a position of non-alignment. As African countries, we have painful memories of a time when proxy wars were waged on the soils of Africa by foreign superpowers. We have not forgotten the terrible, brutal legacy of first having our own continent carved up and colonized by European countries, only to find ourselves once more being pawns on a chessboard during the Cold War. We are not going back to that history. We refuse to go back to that period in history as Africans.
As the country of South Africa came under tremendous pressure from the United States of America, considering being threatened to be taken out of AGOA and talking about the malign Russian act that was sent to the U.S. Congress that never passed, and more importantly, we've seen South Africa came under tremendous accusation based on the current United States of America's administration talking about some bad things happening there.
The neutrality problem, though, goes to the heart. Look at South Africa. All roads in this delegation really lead to its most influential member, South Africa. Last month, you had the U.S. ambassador to South Africa essentially accusing Pretoria of supplying Russia, loading up a Russian boat at a port in South Africa with weapons and ammunition for Russia, which would suggest that it's not too neutral in this conflict. Obviously denied by South Africa, but they are investigating it right now. You have had further accusations that South Africa has not been an entirely honest broker when it comes to its chumminess with Vladimir Putin, that has been more willing to give the benefit of the doubt to Vladimir Putin in this conflict. That is a very big factor. So the economic factors, that dependent on grain and fertilizer, Russia's goodwill, the sense of this is not exactly a neutral group of nations here, and the sense that they are really small fry, that unless the global powers with more vested interests really get involved in this, they won't be able to do anything. The African powers, the critics say, should try to solve their problems at home right now. There's a raging civil war in Sudan. Perhaps they can start there.
Are these talks taking place in St. Petersburg after the annual economic forum in the city? What are you expecting from Saturday's talks?
Very little. And that's not me being just, editorializing and cynical. I say very little because Vladimir Putin himself has signaled and explicitly said in recent days, basically that the Ukrainian offensive is already being essentially crushed, that it has zero chance of success. So the line right now being pushed in the state-run Russian media is that the Ukrainian counteroffensive, as it's being called, is essentially over before it started. Obviously a line that Ukraine would take sharp exception with, and does take sharp exception with. Putin, obviously, the African leaders are coming to Putin with this notion, I sort of see it as a false equivalency notion, that both sides, in theory, are ready to sit down at the table and negotiate honestly and in good faith. Now, look back at the Minsk agreements. All the sides went to the tables with the same sort of notion in their head, that all sides would negotiate in good faith. And the critics would say Russia not only wasn't in good faith, never negotiated. One of the premises of the African delegation's so-called mediation mission is that Russia should withdraw its troops from the territories it has captured since February 2022 last year. That's nearly 20% of Ukrainian territory it occupies. There is not a snowball's chance in hell, given what Vladimir Putin has been saying in recent days, weeks, and months, that the Russians are ready to accept any withdrawal from the territory that they have taken. So that is another reason why the very premise of this peace plan is already very flawed. It is has its DNA has a real mutation in it. It's just not going to work.
South Africa receiving the country of Ukraine's leader is a demonstration again that the continent of Africa has arrived and is asking questions, that the continent of Africa is ready to play That's why the continent of African leaders are questioning their particular position and importance, talking about the United Nations. And African countries have questioned the United Nations' existence in terms of its strategic engagement with the continent of Africa, and why African issues are being discussed at the United Nations without Africa being part of those particular issues. As we saw the former ambassador of the United States of America to the United Nations, Ms. Greenfield, who came out and said the United States of America does not pay attention to the continent of Africa's conflict. So that was a huge statement coming out from that particular official, who to an extent said there were a number of other conflicts globally that were so relevant at the time that the United States of America is always bogged down and does not pay so close attention to continent Africa's issue. That's why the leaders of the continent of Africa to an extent came out clear and said the continent of Africa must have a veto power into the United Nations Security Council, and that Africa wants a seat at the United Nations Security Council. That has been floated out there by the Biden administration previously, and now nobody hears about what's going to happen, have been swept under the carpet.
And let me tell you something that generated a lot of resentment. We were all at one that even as we were going to address an issue of the war which has had a negative impact on the African continent, which is the rise in prices for food, rise in prices for fertilizers, we were clear that we are not going there as beggars. We are not going to ask for a favor to both Ukraine and Russia. We were going there to say, open up the Black Sea Channel so that the grains and the fertilizers should go into the world market. So we were not on a begging mission, even as we are in great need as a continent and all that. That should go to demonstrate that Africa should never be seen as a continent that needs generosity. We want to be treated as equals.
As Mr. Marco Rubio himself refused to attend the G20 heads of foreign ministers in the country of South Africa. That goes along with to demonstrate that South Africa's performance and observation and global standing want to be sabotaged or diminished to an extent. However, make no mistake, South Africa have its own difficulties and challenges, no doubt. However, to a foreign leader stepping in, talking about what's happening in a country, and South African-born officials who come out clear and criticize issues happening in a country where South Africans themselves can deal with this issue. It has gone back to the understanding that the current trade tariffs is not going to affect black South Africans or white South Africans or Indian South Africans. It will affect South Africans themselves. So this goes along with to remind the continent of Africa that it is about time you start re-strategizing yourself, you start looking inward, start trading amongst yourself, revitalize the African continental free trade.
In June 2023, I had the honor of meeting President Zelensky in Kiev as part of the African Peace Initiative. Since then, we have maintained ongoing dialogue between our two countries and our diplomats. We've been engaging together with many other countries in the various preparatory talks for installing peace in Ukraine, and we've engaged in a number of other initiatives. For instance, when the African Peace Initiative leaders, African leaders were in Ukraine and Russia, one of the issues that we put on the table was a comprehensive and unconditional ceasefire. We also put on the table the return of the children who were taken to Russia. We also put on the table the exchange of those soldiers who were either captured by Russia or Ukraine. So the dealings that we have had with other countries, with Ukraine, have been quite extensive in a number of ways. We have just concluded with President Zelensky successful talks during which we exchanged views on how to consolidate and deepen the bilateral relations between our two countries. We also discussed how ministers from both sides can engage to deepen and broaden those relations. We noted a growing interest in expanding relations in peace diplomacy, post-conflict reconstruction and development, and the empowerment of our people, especially women. We also discussed the opportunities for cooperation in areas such as agriculture.
Going back to the visit with regards to Mr. Zelensky has come to realize to an extent that the United States of America is not as a strategic partner that they thought with regards to their strategic engagement globally, as Europe to an extent has been very silent with regards to its performance considering Ukraine's relationship with the United States of America. As we all saw what happened as the United States president lambasted the president of Ukraine at the White House. That embarrasses the global community to an extent. However, we all have seen how European Union partners are moving to the continent of Africa looking for new partnership as China is revitalizing its trade in the Middle East and also more importantly in the Southeast Asian countries. It is vitally important to understand that South Africa has demonstrated that it is a major player in the continent of Africa, a strong global economy. Of course, South Africa has its own difficulties, but you cannot sideline South Africa anymore. It has demonstrated with this visit with Mr. Zelensky in South Africa as a country that is ready, is asking questions, and want to take its place in the global community. I want to thank you for watching. Let me know in the comment section if you feel South Africa has shown leadership that the Western countries would have expected or would have even dreamed of. South Africa has come clear and reminds the country of Israel to an extent that it will not back down with regards to what's happening between Gaza and the Palestinian, talking about Israel and the Palestinian issue happening there, and more importantly that South Africa will continue to build its strategic relationship with the country of Russia, and to an extent South Africa will stand up to the United States. Of course, South Africa has also said the United States is a very important trading partner and they're going to continue to work together, but they will not be bullied. These are strategic times in the continent of Africa's history as Africa begins to ask questions to find its right place in the global community. I want to thank you for watching. I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.